for being here. Okay, I'm going to start now that it's saying that. Hello, thank you for showing up on a Friday night. I'm appreciating you being here for this conversation. I'm really excited about it. Welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour, brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it's our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connection. I'm Michele Kriegman, guest host for the evening, sitting in for Marcy Keithley, and we're glad to have so many of you join us from all over the world. It's wonderful to have each of you here with us. If you haven't already, please say hello in the chat and let us know where you're from. And especially for tonight, let us know if you're part of the adoption constellation or the donor conception constellation, or both. And before I introduce my conversation partner on the topic, an adoptee and a donor conceived person talking, we do have a couple housekeeping items. And I'm gonna, here's the first one, and then I'm gonna pass it to Beth. Welcome, this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook. Please remain on mute. Raise your hand on the screen or the virtual hand to be recognized. And you may post your comments or questions in the chat. If you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thoughts, please contact, pop-ups are coming up as I read this. Please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 800-273-8255. Okay. And I think we're going to have some more announcements at the end, but I really wanted to get started. As I put in the chat, my name is Michele Kriegman. I was born Suzanne Gilbert. There are people on this call who I know first met me through social media as Suzanne. That was the name I was testing out while by day I was working in corporate IT. And now I use only Michele Kriegman. And I've written for years, usually nonfiction, often on cybersecurity of all things. And there's a neat wisdom that I learned from that I think could apply, and I'll bring it up later, to both the donor conception experience, perhaps, and the adoption experience, definitely. And that is, it's not if, but when you're hacked. And what that means if you're part of an adoptive family, in my case. And by hacked, I mean if all the walls that society put up to keep secrets and keep people apart start to come down and get broached. But as part of that conversation, I wanted to introduce someone I'm really excited to know, Cassandra Adams, also here in New Jersey, a donor conceived person. And I'll, Cassandra, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here. So excited to see so many, can you hear me okay?
Now I can, yeah.
Yes, okay. I'm so excited to be here, so excited to see so many names and that I recognize, and so excited to be here with Michele, who is fabulous. I am a late discovery sperm donor conceived person. I found out 5 years ago from a DNA test that my dad who raised me was not my biological father, and that I was conceived via anonymous sperm donation in 1982. I was able to find my biological father very quickly via DNA matches. I have a relationship with him and with some of my newfound siblings. I also found out that my biological father is Ashkenazi Jewish, and that has been a big part of my journey as well, which I'm sure Michele and I will talk about a little bit later also. But I have converted to Judaism after finding this other half of my heritage. And so predominantly what I do is I work with people who are discovering misattributed parentage, that one or both of their parents are not their biological parents. and also specifically with donor conception in particular. I moderate the largest community in the world, which is on Facebook for the entire donor conception constellation. So donors, gamete providers, recipient parents, which is what we call the what would be the adoptive parents, people who are purchasing or using sperm or eggs or embryos, and donor conceived people.
And didn't it change its name recently?
It did, yes. It's
Yeah.
donor conceived best practices, which we thought was a little bit better, more descriptive for what it is. Donor conceived best practices and connections is the official name now. We thought it described better what the aim is, and what we're hoping people get out of it is best practices. So that's one of my passions, is helping parents who are using donor gametes now to make better choices than our parents did 40, 30, even 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm realizing I didn't give a whole lot of background about me. I tend not to, and then someone has to nudge me and say, by the way, how are you connected to this? I was placed for adoption after being in foster care. My birth father and his then fiance, now widow, had wanted to keep me, their heritage was something that was known to the adoption agency and my birth mother, who was truthful about sharing it, but the adoption agency didn't think it was a favorable ethnicity. So they told my adoptive parents nothing is known about the birth father. I was born before the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978, so I'm kind of dating myself. Things would have gone very differently. If I had been born after 1978, state social welfare agencies, private adoption agencies would have been obligated to try and find first the other parent, such as my birth father who wanted to raise me, or other relatives to raise me. And if not that, someone from the same ethnic nation. In my case, that's Cherokee with just a tiny bit of Mohawk. And failing that, to look on the maternal side, my birth mother's side, where at the time, there were two couples who were looking to adopt. So I had three options that would have kept me in touch with at least half of my extended family had I been born after the Indian Child Welfare Act, which I have to say, because I want everyone to know this, is being attacked, and oral arguments are going to be heard by the Supreme Court on November 9th, which is not too far away. So this is something that really, really, really has an impact of how children are placed and how families are kept together or divided. And that's part of my story. But eventually, my birth mother found me in adulthood. And I had to hire a detective to find my birth father, a guy named Joe Collins, who brought together something like 3,000 biological families, adoptees, and birth parents with this work that he did for many years. And just recently, right before COVID, I found out my kids had this great sense of humor. They were getting me a Christmas present, and they knew how much mom's into this stuff. And even though I'd done 23andMe and didn't find much, they got me ancestry DNA. And turns out the first thing that pops up is someone saying, I'm an adoptee and I'm looking for family. And as I learned more about this woman, I found out she was a childless widow. I called on my friend Cece Moore, who some of you may know. She's done a lot of work, first with the adoption community for search and reunion, and then more recently to take the same genetic genealogy skills for solving crimes. And she's amazing. And she helped me narrow it down, and we tracked down Melissa Ann Halbin, my sister, only to find out we found her several weeks after she passed away. But I was able to meet her best friend and learn more about her. And so I feel like I've had this weird life experience of working with detectives to find family, which is not what most normal people do. But it's been a wonderful world. I come away with it loving this community here on a Friday night. I haven't had wonderful reunions. I've had complicated ones. I've had some that are wonderful. I've had some rejections. And I'm very curious how it is for what I almost want to call the next generation. There are fewer and fewer closed adoptions like mine. And in fact, as some of you may have caught in the chat or through social media, I'm also the stepmom of 3 adopted boys. My husband and his ex adopted them. They are the 6th, 7th, and 8th kids of, an overwhelmed married couple. And their situation is very different. It was what was called an open adoption, and open can have all sorts of meaning. In that case, it meant that they were to receive, the birth mother was to receive letters and photos annually, and she got a chance after she had placed 2 of my stepsons with my husband and his then wife to meet them before she had another child and placed him with them as well. So their experience, my experience are generationally different, but what's interesting is pretty much starting at the same time, really, I'll go back a bit to this wonderful year of 1978. And 1978, as I mentioned, was the year of the Indian Child Welfare Act. It was also the year of the first so-called test tube baby. And I think both have had profound impact on family formation in this country and elsewhere. And I kind of, when Marcy gave me the opportunity to do this, I thought, oh, and we were already planning on presenting at the Untangling Our Roots Summit, which we'll talk more about at the end of this. I thought, I want to talk to a donor conceived person. I want to get us starting to talk even before the summit about what we as adoptees can learn, what we have in common, how we're different, what's unique to being a donor conceived person. I think Cassandra, you're the first donor conceived person on this show, hopefully not the last. But when I did it, I sort of thought, well, I'm almost setting it up like adoptee on one side, donor conceived person on the other, but just kind of to get a sense of it. Cassandra and I were talking earlier today, and I thought, well, there's different ways we could divide it up. Just like my stepsons and I had real different adoption experiences, there's other ways you could look at it. There's the late discovery experience for both donor conceived people like Cassandra and some adoptees, not for me. There, number 2 in my checklist of ways we can be different or the same or paired in conversation. It could be some people grew up in England, where my birth mother is, knowing that when they reached adulthood, they would have the tools they needed to search. I did not. And so number 3 are for those of us that kind of lived in a fog where we thought nothing about adoption. I worked for ABC News. I was part of the New York City Press Corps, and I was not afraid to ask questions, but I had 0 questions about my entire paternal side. Like, that's not how reporters work, but it's how I worked as an adoptee. And I call it the fog. You could call it denial. There was a social worker at Rutgers University in New Jersey who said back in the era where everything was closed that denial is a healthy response. If there is no option to find out information or meet your family, which is sad, but probably, a good take on it. Okay, number 4 ways of looking at us that are not just adoptee and donor conception is the idea of an open adoption or an open donation. That's a very different experience than what Cassandra and I experienced. And then probably number 5 is if you can do everything officially, which is in my work in New Jersey and New York, I hope that there are more adoptees in the future that don't have to hire detectives to meet their father. I hope it can be done easily, officially, with society's blessing. And that gets to, how you could pair as number 6, donor conceived people that had to do complicated routes like I did to find relatives. And then maybe another way to look at it with adoption is whether I was placed with strangers as I was, or if I had been kept with my birth father and his wife, I would have faced maternal separation. And that's true for some donor conceived people, I believe, but not all. So there's a lot of ways of looking at both Cassandra's and my, when we say donor conception or adoption, there's a lot of ways where we are similar to each other and not to these other categories, or we're not similar to each other. So I'm just gonna pick yet another one for Cassandra. This is coming. One thing we found that we both have in common, because we both found ethnicities we belong to that we didn't know about, is what we were calling a imposter syndrome earlier today. Did you feel that when you found out that you were donor conceived? And was it because of that, or was it because of this new ethnicity?
I think the biggest case of imposter syndrome came with the new ethnicity. To know that it was something that you always carried with you in your body, but I had not. And growing up in New Jersey, I have to say I'm very fortunate. The fact that I had many Jewish friends, I knew about the Jewish community. It was not I know there are some people who have found this discovery who have truly never met another Jewish person before, and then they find out that they're Jewish, and it's a very, very big shock. And so I was very fortunate to have a lot of Jewish activities and communities that I could kind of jump into in order to explore this part of myself. But jumping in right away, you feel like an imposter. Completely. It's very difficult to know how to identify, if you can identify, especially with an ethno-religious group like the Jewish people, who have rules and laws about who's a member. So you could say, if it's matrilineal, well, my mother is not Jewish. If you can say that, okay, patrilineal is fine, but you have to have been raised in the religion. I was not. So finding people who understand and people who you can trust enough to tell your story to adds complication. So at this point, 5 years in, I can say Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Like, I'm cool with it. Hag Sameach. Like, I'm good. I can identify as Jewish now without. I don't question myself, and I may still feel self-conscious if I go into Jewish spaces, but I have no problem. But it took a lot of work, a lot of
Just as a side note, Shabbat Shalom means good Sabbath. It's Friday sundown, so it's the Jewish Sabbath. So Shabbat Shalom, y'all.
So
but, it's I've heard that also from people that find Russian Orthodox heritage and Greek Orthodox, because it's a religion, but it's also an ethnicity, and so they have rules. I'm finding it now with Native American ancestry. Each tribe has different ways of determining. The Cherokee, it's if you can point to an ancestor on the Dawes rolls. With Mohawk, I think it's still blood quantum, where you have to be a certain proportion, Indian, and it's complicated. And if you don't have the paperwork, which most adoptees don't, you don't have the paperwork. So there's a difference between someone who's just got Native American heritage, that's 10% of the United States, versus the 2% that are enrolled and officially citizens of a tribal nation. And, the recognition is different. But it's kind of crazy, like these two ethnicities, Jewish and Native American, like you have to be official or else you're unofficial. It's kind of.
And I help run support groups for people who find this a significant Jewish, that one or both of their parents are Jewish and they didn't know, to try to make sense of it, because it comes with a lot of baggage. Let's say people find this discovery and then all of a sudden they're overcome with looking through Holocaust records and realizing You know, and they're speechless. It's very, very difficult. And everybody kind of wants something. You're not sure what everybody wants out of it. People have their own individual needs and relationship with exploring this.
Wait, can we
And
go a
it's
little
very
bit?
individual.
Yeah, can we go a little bit deeper there? Because when you talk about exploring, there's something that always strikes me when I read, fiction. So often, the heroes are adopted, or or they're orphans. Harry Potter, or they've had some kind of mother loss, and there's something that sends them out on a quest. And usually, the quest is, that you're going to find a holy grail or some kind of treasure, but very often what you find, the prize, is not what your original goal was. So, in The Wizard of Oz, the orphan Dorothy finds out that she always had the key to go home, and that was the ruby slippers. And the Scarecrow always had intelligence, if not a brain. And so when you go out exploring as a donor conceived person, what are you looking for? And is it the same as the prizes that you find? Is there an overlap, or is there no overlap? And what is it?
It's a really interesting question. When you find out as an adult, I think this goes for a lot of late discovery people, your first instinct is that your identity has just crumbled in front of you. And it may be half for many of us, but it still feels like your entire identity. Because even the half that you retain, I'm still related to my mother, I'm still connected to those biological family members. But I felt for a long time like I was still a fraud in that family as well, just because I was a different person than they had perceived me to be. And there was, wrapped up in the lie. So what you look for immediately is, okay, everything has just crumbled. Well, what is there? Who is this person that makes up the other half of me? You're just looking for answers to questions and medical history, especially as an adult, especially as you're getting older and realizing that everything you were told is inaccurate, at least on one side of your family. So initially, you're kind of looking for just anything. You might tell yourself it's just medical history, or just to know a name, or just to find out who this person is.
So many of us adoptees start that way too. It's funny.
Yeah. And especially for people my age, right? I'm turning 40 on Sunday.
You're a baby.
Yes. But in terms of donor conception, for me, it was still like an under the table sperm deal. There was no records, there was no health history taken. So it was very, there was nothing to be found. I couldn't look to any records to find this information about myself. So I had to go searching. I had to look through my DNA matches. I had to find this person. And once you find the siblings, and once you find out who your biological parent is, there's this draw to find out absolutely anything you can. You go on like a mad hunt to say, what pieces can I pick up from this mess that's just happened to my life? And the more you get, the more it leads you down like a winding path and up and down a huge roller coaster. And you don't know what you're going to find, and you don't know what the next step is. Once I found that my biological father was open to a relationship, I mean, it was I can't describe that feeling, because I'm sure many of you understand what that feeling is, but it's absolutely indescribable, and it makes you just crave more, more contact, getting to know somebody more.
Oh, yeah.
And so those
when
are some
the
of the
first time I spoke to my birth father, and this is one of the cool things he did, was he said, I knew someday I'd get this call. And then that was a Sunday. He said, well, I have morning meetings and an offsite on Monday, and I have offsite training on Tuesday, but the earliest I can do is Wednesday. You want to have breakfast Wednesday? And I was so elated that it was happening that quickly once we found him. yeah, that he was, of course we're going to meet. That was so nice.
It's really, you can't, it's like you can't get your hopes up too high, whatever happens, because uh, you just, nobody knows what to expect. Everybody has different, some people are literally welcomed into the family as another family member. I have not met any extended family members, so I'm not like a part of the family in that way, but some people are. And it's every step that you get, there's always pain at what more could be. um
Mhm.
and
I hear you.
the time lost, and the mirroring that you lost out on. Because I say this a lot, and I say this a lot with adoptees in mind, also adoptees who have been displaced from both sides of their family. But the weird thing about having one parent that you're related to and one that you have not been in contact with and not been allowed to know is that, I'm sure for any of you who have children, when you're, having a child, you cannot control who that child will look like. You can't pick and choose what facial characteristics. You also can't pick and choose what personality characteristics that child will have that are genetic. And of course, not to discount the influence of nurture as well, but there's a lot of genetics to personality.
Okay, so now I'm going to
Yeah,
jump in. Do you look more
yeah.
like your father or more like your mother? I had
I,
to
I
ask.
I look so much like my biological father, and
Really?
that's yeah. And I mean, I can see my now that I am 5 years out, I have learned to reintegrate my face a little bit. But for a long time after I met my biological father, I could only see him in my face. I couldn't see my mom anymore. And
That's
it's a really,
interesting.
it's a distort this late discovery thing really messes with your mind as far as how you see yourself, how you see your physical features. Um, even people have said I look a lot like my maternal grandmother. And honestly, it's something I never noticed the way I notice it now, because now I have the other half and I can look at the ways that I do look like my maternal grandmother. But like I couldn't see it before because I was working with the wrong pieces. I didn't have the full
Wow.
palette of what was making up my face, and I couldn't even see fully the connection to people I was connected to,
In
you
the
know?
adoption world, I mean, my experience was my parents, like starting when I was in a crib, told me I was adopted. That was not a secret. But I've heard from some LDAs, late discovery adoptees, that they had no clue. They absolutely had no clue. Um, and then from others, they'll say, well, that explains a lot. I always kind of felt something, or the interaction with my dad was always just different than it was with the others in the family. Not necessarily bad, it was just something felt different. So for you, did this answer questions, or it made sense and, oh, how could I not have seen this before? Or were you really surprised, or is it a combination?
It's a combination. I was truly surprised. However, again, after lots and lots of looking back on my life and I mean, you basically relive your life after this happens to you. You relive
Interesting.
every single thing that has happened to you and re-examine it under this new light of truth. And it's really, really messed up, and it's really, really difficult. So in going through that, I was able to pick up on things that had happened to me that were clues, or did make this truth made
What
my
are
life
some
make a lot more
examples? Do
sense.
you mind sharing a
Oh
few? I'm
no,
curious.
so my mother is Italian American. My grandparents are from Italy. Um, you know, very dark, dark hair, dark eyes, and my mother as well. My dad, who raised me, is primarily British colonial Dutch, colonial America. He had blonde hair as a young kid, very blue eyes, very fair, very pale, and having darker hair and darker eyes, a little bit of a more olivey complexion, I guess. That I always figured, well, it was just the dominant traits from my mom, that kind of kind of
Yeah.
took over, which I mean makes sense. If I would have had brown eyes, you know, over the blue eyes. But I remember seeing a picture of my dad, and people would tell me sometimes that I looked like my dad because my dad has a little bit of like a longer face, and I do as
Mhm.
well.
So
And
they
they're
were
not the
looking for a connection somehow,
yeah,
right?
they're not the same shape, but like I guess my face is longer than my mom's, so it would have to be my dad's whatever. But I remember looking at old pictures with my mom and seeing a photo of my dad in high school, blonde hair. I just looked and I said, wow. I said, I don't look anything like daddy. And she's just like, well, like you have his face shape, and yeah, you look more like him now than when when he was a teenager. And yeah, you just have my darker hair and stuff like that. And but I it did strike me as, yeah, when I met my biological father, he's also dark hair, dark eyes, you
Mhm.
know. Um, so it made sense. And even some of my dad had always had a lot of mental health concerns and issues, but recognizing the role that this played and the secrecy, the role that it played in exacerbating what concerns and conditions he already had.
So you
It
think the
made sense.
secrecy added stress to the family? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Substance abuse for my dad, very disconnection, kind of being disconnected from the rest of the family in many ways. And, while those are symptoms of depression that he may have had to some extent anyway, there was a very clear disconnect at times.
So you
And
meant,
it's
yeah.
painful.
You mentioned substance abuse, and I haven't seen studies that absolutely nail cause and effect with adoption, but there certainly is a lot of evidence that there's an association between addiction and adoption. And I would be irresponsible if I would pretend to know the absolute causes and effect. But it is one theory is it comes from maternal loss or from disconnection from the rest of our, because we are mammals, we are parts of tribes and herds and packs, and being disconnected from that might be something that would be treated in ways that aren't helpful, like using substances that aren't great. Is that something you see in the donor conception community, or is it just things are just coming to the surface too soon to know?
I think things are coming to the surface just now, and I don't know that there are studies. The best I can point people to is the We Are Donor Conceived survey, which would be on there. If you Google We Are Donor Conceived, they did it. They do a yearly survey of donor conceived people, and I don't know that addiction has been on that questionnaire yet, but
Okay.
mental health issues has definitely is something that gets discussed extensively in our groups, and those are extremely prevalent in our community. And I think there are many reasons. Um, one being a lot of us were lied to. There's still to this day more lying that goes on in the donor conception world than in the adoption world. It's easier to hide. Mom is pregnant. There's a baby bump. It's so that's especially for egg donor conceived people, it's easier to hide something like that.
Yeah, and
And
I'll share a
clinics are
story with you. We have acquaintances that used a surrogate and used an egg donor. So the mom was not pregnant and did not have, it was not her egg, but they went to great lengths to post on Facebook several pictures staged, like they had gone through labor and delivery, where she's in the hospital gown, the hair back, lying in the bed, face disheveled, as though she had just gone through and given a birth biologically. And I just feel like it's almost like a throwback. I feel like for something like 30 plus years, the adoption reform movement in various states has worked to get, depending on your stringency of definition, either 10 or 31 states to somewhat open records. And aside from that official work or legal work or legislative work, we've also been speaking to try and get prospective adoptive parents to know that it's better for the family and better for their child to tell the truth. And my parents went back to the adoption agency and were on panels and spoke about telling their daughters right away that they were adopted. So I thought that we had done all that and that society got that. And I was having this conversation the other night with my husband, who adopted much later than I was adopted. And I said, how is it that I thought we got this awareness around adoption. And so then the people that were prospective parents who didn't choose adoption, but chose donor conception, went and did all the things that I thought we'd been educating society were not good for the family and for the children. And
they were doing it, yeah.
Yeah, and my husband's take on it was, oh, it was the China Korea thing. And I'm like, what? Like, are we having the same conversation? He said, yeah, no. When we were looking, it was kind of like there would be people discussing where they wanted to adopt from. And one of the things was where your child was less likely to ever find their birth family again. Would it be China or would it be Korea? And people would make decisions based on that. And he said, so it's probably the same thing. Now that the adoption constellation has more open adoptions, there are people that don't want that. And if they can't have closed adoptions, they can have embryo donation, which is someone else's biological fetus or embryo left over from the IVF process that is then adopted by another couple, or again, any other version of donor conception, because it's like the China Korea thing. Where can we keep more secrets? Or where can we really know that we've severed ties to the child's ancestry? And that was my husband's take.
And it really is true. And I mean, granted, people choose donors of a certain, background for many reasons, but one is also can be to have the child fit in to the family where no one questions that the child will look like the other part of the family.
Right.
So, in my day, the doctors were choosing, like my biological father was just available that day to give a sample. And that's kind of what the process was. But of course, my mother's doctor said, oh yes, we'll try to find somebody who looks like your husband. And that's what they would that's what they would kind of say to.
So are you saying that your biological father has blonde hair and he's English, Irish?
No, not at all.
That's not what you're saying.
He was available, he was available
Okay.
that day. And I'm almost wondering if maybe they thought, well, maybe I remember someone in a group one time saying that the doctor said they would try to find somebody who looked like the mother. That way the child might really look like the mother, and people would just say, oh, well, the kid looks exactly like the mother, and not think of, there were all, and this was into the 80s, this was into the 90s, and people are still doing that. They're still, maybe the doctors aren't choosing, maybe people are going through the catalogs now themselves. People are still choosing, oftentimes based on, can I get away with not having to tell the child this? People are still in 2022 planning on not telling their child that they are donor conceived because it is easier to hide. And it's not possible anymore. If I can find someone within, a day and a half, when there are zero records, nothing to go on, and I can find that person via DNA, you will not, there's no way to keep this kind of secret from your child anymore. And kids know, as you were saying too, the depression and the mental health issues in the donor conceived community. So yes, part of it is from that family system of lying in the family, suppressing. So I think Andy said in the chat, like, it takes a lot of energy to keep up that facade. It
Yeah, it
really does.
does. It
It
does.
the toll. Initially, before I got angry at my mother, I just felt bad for her because she was crying, and I was like, my goodness, you spent so much energy, so much pain hiding that from me. What a tremendous burden to put on yourself for such a something that just was not worth that
You know,
kind of
it's
pain keeping to yourself. And so that system in the family, really, what I have a friend says a lot is like, secrets keep us sick. So that secrecy in the family has this underlying element of the foundation is shaky. So obviously you can still
yeah,
have good
thank you.
relationships, but there's a shaky foundation there.
Or the perception is it's shaky. Because what I found, we had a big family event. I invited my birth mother, or my birth mom, as I call her, and she came over from England. And my adoptive mother had passed away about a year before, but my dad was there, my adoptive dad, and he met her. And the sky didn't fall. And that's why I say perceived shakiness of the foundation, because you could almost see him like just exhaling all day long, because it was like, oh, it's okay, you know. And then he kind of got daring and he said, well, did you invite your birth father? And I said, no. And he said, oh, you should have invited him too.
Yeah,
And I was stunned.
it's amazing. I really, and because in the group we have to spend, donor conceived adults have to spend so much energy, especially with prospective parents. We have to spend so much energy convincing them that this matters, that it's important to us, and that it's something they need to take into account when they're raising their children.
And I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in because I don't know everybody in the room with us here, but in case there are prospective donor, or no, I'm sorry, I'm saying it wrong, prospective recipient parents or prospective adoptive parents, how would you tell them that this is important, that knowing the truth is important?
It's who makes up your child's body. It's in our bodies. It's our faces, it's our personalities, it's the way we think. It's part of who we are in so many deeply complex ways. Especially it was a big kind of revelation of myself identity, finding out that I was Ashkenazi Jewish. It leads you to the entire history of a people, and it actually made a lot of myself make sense in so many ways. And it really, it just adds a lot to our understanding of ourselves, and the relationships with siblings, our relationships with our biological parents. Those are relationships that you can't make up for lost time.
I really got a thrill.
Grief.
I got a thrill seeing someone who was related to me. My birth father, my paternal siblings have these hands. These are like the Ray family hands right here. And it was just so cool to see them mirrored in somebody else. I mean, it was almost, I didn't think this growing up because I was in my happy fog. But when I started to feel more deeply and think about it and start to get, little tidbits of prizes from this exploration, yeah, some of it was like, wow, I've been living my life like a vampire, meaning vampires stand in front of mirrors and they're not supposed to see their reflection. And we're not supposed to cast shadows. And there's almost like we're like genealogical vampires. And if this is a weird metaphor, just forget about it. But if it works for you, it works for me, which is I didn't see myself reflected in the faces and the hands around me. And I didn't see my shadow cast back in my ancestors, because my extended family, Some were wonderful, some not so much. They didn't adopt me, and I didn't know my ancestors the way I knew the living members of the family, and I wasn't genetically related to them. So there's that sense of no shadow, no reflection, and that's why I say vampire.
And it's very hard to describe that to someone who has not lived it. And I think that's one of the big, as you said, one of the big takeaways for me from this whole experience is that you just do not understand someone else's lived experience unless you have lived it. And so the experience of finding out later in life is just incomprehensible if you haven't experienced it. The experience of being separated from one or both sides of your biological family is indescribable unless you have experienced it, and you can do your very best to learn to understand. But it's given me a lot of empathy for every other marginalized group in this whole world, because I can sit there and with confidence say, I do not fully understand, but I am more willing to sit back and listen to your perspective and learn from your perspective, because that's what I've wanted people to do for this, especially parents, potential parents.
There's one word you said there that I thought was especially evocative, the confidence to just let someone tell their story. What does it mean about you internally if you won't let someone tell your story? And I think a lot of us adoptees may have had the experience of someone who knows not a whole lot about being adopted telling us how we feel, or telling us how we should feel, or why we shouldn't feel the way we do. So why is it confidence to not be that person? I love that word in this setting.
Yeah, it's so much easier to help somebody, try to feel like you're helping somebody see the bright side of things,
it is easy. Yeah, put a bow on their story.
Easier. Yes, it's easier if I meet somebody who's adopted to say, well, but at least you had some wonderful parents who raised you, and that's so great, and you should be so grateful. It's just easy to come back with that, isn't it? If you're just trying to be kind of a generally nice and upbeat kind of person, it's just easy to say that. It takes a lot more.
The whole conversation rosy. Yes.
Yeah, it takes a lot more confidence in your ability to say, I don't understand that, and I'm going to sit back and I'm just going to listen to you, and I'm going to take what you say to heart, and I'm going to understand that I don't know everything about this situation, and I'm going to take your word for it. And that's what's allowed me to work with the adoption community too, is because, hey, I was not separated from my mother at birth. But you know what? I believe you. I believe you that is insanely traumatic. And I will fight till my dying day telling people that it's insanely traumatic, because I know how insanely traumatic my situation was. And I can only imagine how much that adds, that different angle, that pain, that pre-verbal trauma. And especially as a mother myself, seeing that bond with my child too, how much I understood that. And really, honestly, it was something that I had to consider, because my daughter, who I conceived after infertility, by the way. So I love when people say, but you don't know what it's like to not be able to have a child. I do. Maybe I didn't go to the same lengths that some people did, and I didn't struggle for as long, but I do understand.
Can I ask you, did you have your daughter before or after discovering the donor conceived?
After. And that's one thing also. So my daughter was 1.5 years old when I found out, and I had to deal with the very severe PTSD that I had, and the thought that I might not be there in the future for her as a 1.5, 2-year-old, because that was at the time I was struggling. So I actively was thinking and planning as what would happen to her if I were not here, because I was in that bad of a state for a very long time. And that experience also gives me a lot of empathy for what would happen to a child if all of a sudden the parent that they grew inside. The parent that had raised them early in their life was suddenly not there anymore. And a lot of empathy for situations of, where children are removed from their homes, especially by, certain for reasons that are not legitimate. And yeah, and it's just, it's extremely painful. So it's like using
So
the knowledge.
you're touching on some things that raise a question for me. Like in my case, if you haven't figured out from my story and the fact that my father and his fiance wanted to keep me, I was the result of an affair. His fiance was away on sabbatical, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes with adoption, there comes colorful stories, and especially in an era where illegitimacy, to use the term, was a bad thing. That's also given as the reason for sealing records to hide the shameful past, as though we would all believe, in some cases, people were placed for adoption and their parents were married. That is actually true for my 3 stepsons, but in most cases, that's not the case. But I would think with donor conception, there's not that same shame of illegitimacy, but yet there's the secrecy. Where's that coming from?
So it's kind of twofold. That some of that shame is thankfully has lessened, but if you read the book Uprooted by Peter Bonney, who is a fabulous gentleman, he goes into the history. He found out
Peter
middle-aged.
Bondi. Okay.
Peter Bonney, Boni, yes.
Oh,
And
okay.
if you, he found out as an adult that he was donor conceived in middle age, but it was prior to DNA testing. So he yes, thank you, Cara. So yeah, but it was like, he had this time before DNA testing to basically research the heck out of how artificial insemination began. And one of the things he found was an article from, oh God, I don't remember the decade. I want to say maybe the 40s, called Artificial Bastards, which was about us. And that was one of the first references in like medical journals. Yes, the Catholic Church was against it. There was actually a case, I think probably around that time in the 40s or so, where a woman, they were asking for a divorce, and the woman, the husband was granted a divorce based on infidelity, but they had used a donor. Both of them had consented to it, but it was possible to use that as an excuse for infidelity. And so at the beginning, there was that stigma that we were bastards. So, out of wedlock children. That stigma
so there
also
is
drove it
still
underground.
that, but you said there was something else that might be at the root of the same.
Yeah, and then it became also coupled with infertility trauma and shame, which was especially at the beginning, because as you said, IVF, which ushered in the era of donated eggs and embryos, didn't begin until the late 70s, early 80s, and then not popularized until the decade we're on and stuff. So, primarily before that, it was sperm, and so it was male infertility. I mean, and prior to the 80s, 90s, lesbian couples in many cases were not permitted to use sperm from, it was not, I don't know if it wasn't legal or doctors weren't allowing it, or
it's interesting that actually parallels adoption, where some agencies in some countries, they didn't want to place children with lesbian or gay couples, or they didn't want to place children with single mothers. And so some of that carried over into DCP.
Exactly. And so for a lot of the history of donor conception, it was the shame of male infertility, which was driving the practice underground. There was that sense of being emasculated, not feeling like enough of a man, and not wanting the kids to know about that, not wanting anyone to know about that. How could you ever speak of such a thing? And that really drove the practice underground. The way doctors performed it drove it underground. The way they obtained the sperm drove it underground, because they were either using their own sperm or just using colleagues, not keeping records. There was also the beginnings of it. There was an air of eugenics to the movement. The first recorded case of donor insemination was in the, I think, 1880s. Dr. Pancoast in Philadelphia, and he used the sperm of his most handsome, medical student, and ushered in the era of using handsome, smart medical students.
But in Dr. Pancoast's case, they knocked the mother out with chloroform.
Yeah,
they
sure
told her that they were treating her husband and that it would just take some time. She did not know that she was inseminated. There was a group of medical students watching, as this was
basically
done to
rape.
her.
It was basically rape, medical rape. And that's the origins from which, that's kind of like our version of the Georgia Tann story.
Right. I was about to say that.
That's how it grew. And I think there's an article as well.
And let me just say, for those that aren't familiar with Georgia Tann, she ran an orphanage that also adopted out children in Tennessee. And as it got progressively less supervised, there are even cases where it's believed that it's true that she would ask prospective parents, what kind of child do you want? What do you want them to look like? And that she may have even gone to poor neighborhoods and tried to match that order. She lobbied to have records sealed for adoption. And so, like what you're describing with donor conception, it's sort of the nature of how the adoptions or the relinquishments were made to happen were a big reason, far less to do with the children's, the details of the children's conception per se, but more to cover up the practices of people that were running these businesses, whether you call it an adoption business or a donor conception business. And that was Georgia
really
Tann.
So many factors.
Yeah.
So many factors to covering it up. And we really do have the LGBTQ community to thank for opening up the conversation a bit, because, two mom couples were talking about it with their kids, and opening the door for it to be talked about, that using a sperm donor was something that could be discussed and would be discussed in school, and you would know it would.
That's interesting, because they really didn't have the option after their child reached a certain age to do what heterosexual couples who were recipient parents or adoptive parents could do, and just kind of, covering up if they chose to keep a family secret. So I wanted to share one thing, going back to an earlier question about prizes. For me, it was wonderful. I was in a family where people tended not to write, didn't like to read, didn't go to college by and large, and that's fine, but then to meet my brother, who was a working journalist, Tiernan Ray, and he still is, and it was just neat to find people that had interests that were like mine. And it's probably not that exciting in your average family. And there's always the family black sheep or white sheep that's a little different. But I think by and large, you'll have a family of people that like words, or a family of people that might like tennis. And to find that I had all those reflections, especially with a number of other writers in my birth family, was really one of the prizes for me. Did you find similarities? Because I think you had told me this, earlier today, that you met siblings. You may have said it tonight, but I didn't catch it.
Yes, I've met a couple of siblings that my biological father raised, and also a couple who are from his donations.
Okay. So how many siblings do you have?
There are 4 of us from his donations, and then 3 that he raised. So that is 7 of us total so far, as children of his.
Have you met everyone? Have you met all your siblings so
No,
far?
there's one of his raised kids is not interested, and one of our donor siblings is also doesn't believe it, or has not responded on the DNA website. So, there's that hope that they will. My hope is always to give people medical history, if nothing else.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm the family, I try to get everybody together. I try to keep communication open, because I care about them and I love them. And it's hard feeling like you missed out on time and that you can't really call each other family, and every single person has a different definition of what family means and what they expect out of that relationship.
Oh,
And
yeah, that's a good one.
it's insane. And there's only a few of us really. Whereas, I know many people have sibling groups in the hundreds, and it's impossible.
Oh.
It's not fair to the donor conceived person. It's not fair to the donor, even to the biological parent, to have that many children, because if they step up and decide to do the best that they can to form connections with their biological children, it's just impossible to maintain that. It's just not
That
fair. And
many
it's also a
relationships.
burden. Yeah, it's a burden on recipient parents as well. I don't think parents realize that until they get in the nitty gritty of it, that maintaining relationships with their kids' siblings requires you to have relationships with the parents, and that it just creates this entire web of extended family. And it's very complicated to maintain, and lower sibling limits just benefit everybody.
Is
And I
that
know
something that the donor conceived person community is looking for?
absolutely we're Australia, New Zealand, the UK have a bit more stringent limits on the number of times that sperm from one individual, or eggs as well, but eggs,
Okay.
the sibling groups for egg donor conceived people tend not to be as large as of yet, but they can still be quite numerous. And even having I don't have that many yet, but I know there are more of us based on our age range, and based on how long my biological father donated. I mean, there are many of us in the New York City area, many of us. And because there were no records, we have no idea how many. We'll never know how many. We'll never know if some have passed away already. We'll never know if I mean, my daughter will be finding them after I'm dead on the DNA sites. I mean, I don't know
Wow,
what the world's going to look
that's
like.
an interesting thought.
But yes,
Yeah.
people are already finding that their parents are donor conceived from doing DNA tests, because they're matching with half first cousins.
Okay. There is someone, for lack of a different home, long before 1978 and the growth of a donor conceived community. There's a guy who he's in his late 70s, maybe almost 80 now, Bill Cordray, who has gone to, he's wonderful. And he's gone to a lot of different adoption conferences, and he wasn't adopted, but he kind of adopted the adoption community, because for his generation, there really wasn't a vibrant donor conceived community. And I know that we're getting to the point where we really should open up for questions, but I think most of us, because we are NAAP, know a lot about what we want in the adoption world and what we want people to hear. And there's been other speakers before me that have spoken about that. But what is something that is unique to donor conceived people or to the donor conceived community that you would like us to know? We've been talking about what we have in common, but what's unique, or what legislatively or culturally would you like for donor conceived people and you want us to know about? And then I guess I'll ask Beth if we can maybe open it up to questions.
I think the main thing that kind of makes us unique is that we are created intentionally to go through this experience. This is planned for us pre-conception. Someone I know likes the term preconception adoption, but I mean, it's complicated. It's complicated, especially with, I know, but
Okay.
there people are all all kinds of terms. And of course, with the way the world is, well, I can't say the world, but the way that this country is right now, you have to be careful with terminology as well, how that affects people with uteruses and how that affects people's rights to reproduce or not. But that's one of the big things for us, is that because people are going into this planning it out for their future child, planning out this intentional family separation from either one or both sides, we want to catch people as soon as possible to help them make better decisions for that future child, because you can catch people before they make a bad decision, or you can say a bad decision, but a decision that is going to negatively impact their child. And this is all about harm reduction, because the fact of the matter
and
is,
in some cases, I think it's like really short-term thinking, and maybe they need adult donor conceived people to help them think long-term. And I think it was something you said once about anonymous donation. Why would you choose someone that would reject your child if their child ever decides to search for them?
Exactly. It's not in this day and age, when people are being asked whether they want to be anonymous or open at 18, to choose someone who is intentionally saying, no, I do not want contact, it's honestly, it's just cruel, and it's not okay going forward. We know too much now. We know too much from the adoptee community, and it doesn't hurt. People will say, well, what if I don't want to ever reach out to, what if my child doesn't want to reach out to? Nobody's forcing them to reach out to the donor. And in fact, if you foster, which is what we try to do too, is help parents foster relationships, especially with siblings when they're young, because sometimes, the donor, there's complications there as far as whether you can contact them and such, but especially with siblings, is that, as the kids grow up together, they have those memories. They can always choose who they want to remain in contact with, and choose. If you're not giving your child the choice and the option from a very young age, you're not giving your child the agency with which to make an informed decision about their own bodies and their own families. And that's one of the biggest things, I think, that we really try to hit home, is anonymity it's not only not possible anymore. So the clinics are deceiving donors, they're deceiving parents, they're deceiving everybody involved by promising anonymity. It's not possible, but it also needs to just be eradicated, even from their side, because giving people who plan to not provide updated medical history, giving people that ability to produce dozens and dozens or hundreds of offspring is just not ethical. You would want somebody who is willing to be known, who's willing to be open, who's willing to answer questions, to be available for that child, whether it's medical needs. I mean, I've had parents, coming into the group, and they're frantic because their child's just been diagnosed with a medical issue, and they're reaching out to the bank, and the bank is not contacting them. And, and I've had donors come back and say,
let me just jump. And by bank, you don't mean your financial bank, you mean your donor bank.
The sperm bank.
Sperm bank. Thank you.
Sperm bank. Yes.
I couldn't say it.
I know. I was on a call one day, and people just kept talking about donors, like donating money to the organization. I was like ready to be like, shut up, stop with the donors. I can't,
Right. Their meaning of donor.
Don't even say that word, but yeah, it's just like, it's anybody who you would want to be the biological parent of your child, you would want someone who was caring, who would care enough to be willing to update your child, to update you on their medical history. I've had, donors coming and saying that they've tried to call the clinic that they donated to because they've had a serious medical history change. I've
met birth mothers that have done that with adoption agencies, saying, hey, I had breast cancer. I had no idea could be a genetic thing. I need to let my kids' parents know that. And
the bank, will not they don't share that information. Or people will say, my child's been diagnosed. I have a good friend who's donor conceived child has celiac disease, and the way they were able to make a diagnosis much more easily is because they're in contact with their large sibling group. And guess what tends to run in that sibling group? Celiac disease.
Oh,
So
that's
it
interesting. So it's not just the
contact
donor,
with other siblings.
it's not just the donor or parent, there's siblings you can turn to. I found in my own reunions, like some of my cousins I'd want as friends, even if we weren't related. And, my brother Tiernan is fine and we have a relationship, but I have a sister, his full sister, who I've contacted twice in over 20 years, and she wants no contact. But it's interesting. I focused on parents, but you're right. Siblings are also a resource for donor conceived people,
Especially
as
with
they are for
us.
adoptees.
Yeah, especially with us, the numbers are just astronomical. You just
Yeah.
wait, you check DNA sites every day sometimes, waiting because you just
Wow.
do not know if you will ever find them. You don't know how many there are. It's kind of insanity. And
I guess that is a different experience. I mean, for me to have a sister who's also an adoptee that's like crazy. You never hear of that, or you almost never hear of that. I thought I was wrong, but certainly in the DCP world, it's yet more common.
And anyone above the age of like 20 who is much more likely to have been lied to. The fact of the matter is that when you keep getting DNA matches of people who, again, don't know, you have to relive the entire trauma of you finding out when this new sibling of yours finds out, and they're going through the trauma and you're trying to help them. Meanwhile, you're sort of past it, but maybe it brings you back, and now you have to get to know this person. It's just it's a lifelong thing. Like there are things you find every day that make you realize that even people asking you how many siblings you have, like, oh, so how many siblings do you have? Like, I mean, that's a complicated question for adoptees as well, but like for us, it's like then you got to like explain the whole situation, which is you can't just say like like, oh, it's so complicated. And I think too, one of the last things that I also want to say about what we want the general public to know as well is what often adoptees are told, which is you are chosen and you should be grateful, right? So that's your mantra that you guys get from.
So do you get you were engineered, you should be grateful?
No, if that would be the honest way to say it. We were engineered to please our parents. No, but people will say you were so wanted. And I'm sure people say that to adoptees too, but for us, it's because our parents went through so much. You were so wanted, and that is supposed to eradicate any feelings of loss or grief that we have. And the truth is it doesn't. And it may work for a little child to feel wanted, and of course we all want to feel wanted. Parents will often say, wait, I can't tell my kid they were wanted. I'm like, no, it's not that you can't tell your kid that they were wanted. We all, I tell my kid she's wanted. We all want to feel
so
that.
A lot of us adoptees were raised with a picture book called The Chosen Baby,
right? It's putting that as a burden on your child that they cannot complain or they cannot voice their experience about their situation because they were wanted or because they were chosen. Then they have a responsibility to that parent. And the thing is, too, that I also want to emphasize is that because we spend so much energy discussing all these things with parents, a lot of times parents are very fearful of, well, wait, so if the biological kin is so important, then is that going to harm my relationship with my child? And
my husband is afraid of that. My husband is afraid from watching me, but also in some ways he's really definitely different from his boys, and he knows that they've got 5 older siblings, and wow, is that a draw, and is he going to lose his boys? That's a real fear.
Yeah, it is. And I'm here to reaffirm that we love our parents. I mean, assuming our parents, I'm, currently not in the greatest relationship with my raising parents because of not just of the lie, but what happened subsequently. I was pretty much, it was not pretty. But those of us who, have loving parents who raised us. This does not being biologically related to them does not mean we do not love them, you know, that we do not value the connections and the memories that we share with them. It absolutely does not. I like I say, my biological father, I call him by his first name, but my dad is daddy, you know, even as an almost 40-year-old, I was, you know, last time I saw him, he's daddy, you know, and there's a complicated relationship there even prior to all of this. But, you know, it's never to say that nurture does not matter. And it's never to say that we don't share things with our parents who raise us and that we don't love them. And it's sad that I have to repeat that. It's sad that I feel like I need to say that, you know, to reassure parents, but I'm kind of used to it at this point, you know,
it's
that
very
I do want to
kind that you do, because I know that it's a fear of my husband's, and I don't think
for anybody watching, it's not a matter of not loving you. It's about different parts of yourself. It's about different, different
I
people
wanted
that you
to
love in
just
different ways.
I want to share with everyone a story about something that happened in September, and I shared it with Cassandra also earlier today. I was invited to a family party by a friend of mine who has triplets that were donor conceived. And last time I heard, or last time we had to talk about donor conception, we're usually working out carpools and other mundane things, and we don't sit around talking about our children's conception. But she was concerned because her triplets actually had a fourth sibling, a full sibling, who had been an embryo donation. She had one embryo left over from in vitro fertilization. She didn't want to have it destroyed. There is a market among infertile couples to adopt embryos that have already been created as a result of IVF. And so a single mother in Connecticut adopted this fourth child of hers that is the full sibling of the three that my kid plays with. And at that point, the mother didn't want to have contact and didn't want her son to know that he had three older siblings out there, and she was really upset. And so in September, but she was upset, but she didn't think it was good for the child, but she also said, hey, I'm not the parent and I have to respect that for now. And things change. And at this party, it was a birthday party for the three kids, their biological father, the sperm donor, had flown in from Arizona to New Jersey to attend. He was there with his wife and their toddler, and he was in and out dealing with the toddler who didn't want to be part of everything. And then I noticed behind me this woman with a little boy who was younger, but was the spitting image of the three kids that I knew. And I was like, oh, and later I asked my friend Mel, is this the other sibling? And she said, yeah, she told him. And so we invited them both. And really that was a change, and people do change, and culture changes and society changes, I hope for the better. And that was really cool to see that.
Yeah, that's really our goal moving forward is, I know there are some groups, like I mentioned, where there's like co-parenting, platonic co-parenting, and that's kind of another category where, you know, sometimes parents are living together and raising a child, but you know, our goal is to kind of move from the shroud of secrecy into open situations where even, you know, there are a lot of, you know, female couples, lesbian couples in our group who have a known donor who like picks the kid up on weekends and is, you know, and who the kids know as dad, and they know who he is, and he's not an active parent, you know, not actively doing
Cassandra,
day, but yeah.
You and I are going to keep talking, but I'm seeing there's a bunch of notices from the chat, and Beth has her hand up, so I'm going to let Beth talk. And I bet there are questions for you and maybe for me.
I have a question that was sent right to me, and it's a fabulous question. It's not going to be a short answer question, though. This person is asking, you know, can adoptees and donor conceived persons work together to get legislation changed so that we can have our rights and maybe even have corrected birth certificates, you know, genetically corrected birth certificates?
That is wonderful, and Cassandra might have more to add, but I know that earlier this year in Colorado that happened. they had already incrementally restored access to original birth certificates for adoptees. And then, and this is over a period of years. And Richard Erlob and other people there then worked with the donor conceived community to pass a bill that they had in the legislature. And what was nice, according to what I heard, and I have not been following it that closely, GLAAD, which is the legal advocacy group for the LGBTQ community, was on board. And that was a nice change, because in New Jersey, for a long time, our adversaries were, and this was heartbreaking, some LGBTQ advocates, now the National Organization of Women, because they had an argument that privacy extended to taking away other people's birthright to know their heritage, and which they eventually walked away from that. The Catholic Church walked away, and you know, LGBTQ community walked away from that. But to actually see the three groups, GLAAD and the adoptee community and the donor conceived community in Colorado working together, was what I hope is going to be something we see more of in the future.
It was fabulous. I actually testified in Colorado. My my in-laws, my mother and father-in-law live in Colorado, so I had a connection which allowed me to testify via Zoom. Unfortunately, I was unable to fly out there, but it was fabulous. We had parents testifying, we had adoptees. It was so moving, and to see the LGBTQ support that my colleagues and friends in the U.S. Donor Conceived Council were able to get. It's so moving for people like us who are so impassioned about creating healthy LGBTQ families where there's more openness involved. And it's been really wonderful to see so many groups kind of finally coalesce around this issue and realize that it's not hurting anybody's. That's never the goal, is to hurt anybody's family. It's always to increase the ability of everyone to connect.
I see that it's 8:29. Do we need, is it a hard stop at 8:30, Beth? Or
pretty close. Our Zoom would go a little bit longer, but right along with this question that was asked, and I'm going to unpin the two of you, but right along with this question that was asked, we need to talk about the summit, because that is exactly what we are doing with Untangling Our Roots Summit. We are trying to unite these two communities, three communities, actually, so that we have a stronger, louder voice, and that we can get more people to pay attention to us, legislators included. And so the exciting news today is that tickets are live beginning today for the summit. I'm just going to share my screen, Michelle.
Yeah, did you have a slide to show the?
I do.
The rates, or
okay,
that it's open?
Today tickets are live, and I have heard they are selling quickly. First 100 tickets are $279. After that 100, then through the end of the year, $319, and then $399 up through the end of February. And I can tell you that untold hours have gone into planning this, and the planners are incredibly excited about the potential that was the motive of this question that was just asked. What is the potential of all of these communities coming together, and what can we do? And this is going to be an incredible event. You will want to be a part of it. And I was so excited to hear that. I mean, within a little bit of it opening, they said the tickets were going. The tickets were going. And so all you have to do, type in Untangling Our Roots. You know, a fabulous website has been created for us, and you can purchase your ticket. You can reserve your hotel room, everything right from that website. And the whole point is that these communities can work together and have a louder, stronger voice. And because of all the similarities, which was a perfect example tonight, you two just what I said, we could pretend that we planned this for you two to talk the day tickets opened, but that would be a lie, because we've been hoping to open it for the last couple of weeks, but a lot of fine tuning needed to happen on the website. But what a good introduction to how these communities interconnect, overlap, all of those different things. And so
Michelle and I can talk for several hours.
Yeah, we could keep going. Like, that's why we both looked really sad when Beth said, yes, we actually do have to end at some point.
we do have to end pretty soon, but yeah, this has been a great discussion. And like I said, perfect timing for the summit opening.
Yeah, perfect timing.
And yeah.
Both Cassandra and I are presenting. I think, Cassandra, you're on a panel with some other folks, and
Yeah, there'll be a panel discussion with a couple other donor conceived people, and I believe with a sperm donor, former sperm donor. And I don't know if they have the whole details yet of exactly the focus of it, but it will be about donor conception. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm going to be doing what I've done at some churches in the area and at some other more writing retreats, is how to write a memoir. One of the exciting things that's happening in the adoption community is us finding our voices and telling our stories. And this is just from my years of writing shorter pieces, not big long memoirs, although I have written 2 novels, 2 novellas, but shorter magazine article length or blog article length ways of telling our story and really breaking it down and looking at the craft of writing and what to leave in and what to leave out. And so we're both going to be there, and we hope you are too. How's that?
We actually have a couple of other people on tonight who are going to be there.
Oh, really?
Joni, is she still here?
Oh, Joni Mantel from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, hi.
She is a speaker. Joni, just tell us what you're going to be talking about.
I'm actually doing a therapeutic writing workshop on what it feels like to be adopted, donor conceived, or NPE, and how it feels to be communicating with other people about that and all different topics. But it's going to be an experiential writing workshop, and it should be fun.
Okay, great. And then we have Lori. Lori, want to tell us what you're going to be talking about?
Yes, thank you, Beth. I'm going to be on a panel with 3 other people. Jane, I can't say her last name, Sliwka, Dee McGee, and Amber Jimberson, which I'm excited about. We're going to be talking about what we've learned from our past and future, what we've learned from our past and how we can apply that to our future.
Okay, that's great. And there could be somebody else that I might be missing. Yeah, Dee McGee, here it says Deidre McGee. I thought that was the same person. She is also on the call tonight. So
Yeah, I saw her earlier.
we have had so many proposals come, and I will be the first one to tell you, I do not know the name of every person that came through. Our email was pinging so much with proposals coming in, but which was great. We were excited that people were excited about participating. So yes, we have Dee, and if there's anyone else, just speak up quick, because I don't want to leave you out.
Yeah, I just want to say what a wonderful time we're living in. You know, this is a time where legislatively we're opening up records and access to information, and where we're not with DNA testing. I think 1 in 7 people that test find a near relative they didn't know about. That was one number I heard once from Kara Rubenstein-Darin, who's from Right to Know. And it's so exciting that this is happening and we're finding each other. Thank God for social media, even during COVID, that we can connect this way and now get to see each other once again in person, finally. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's amazing to meet other people who've gone through DNA surprises or unknown or misattributed parentage. There's never a shortage of understanding one another, you know, and that's kind of my passion in this, is that we all have these different branches of our experiences, these different things that make our experiences unique, whether as communities or as individuals, but yet there's so much opportunity for understanding one another and then advocating for one another. and that's a big thing. That's a big thing I wanted to see in the donor conceived community as well, is I didn't want us to hurt the adoptee community by, suggesting. I know there was sometimes people will say, well, why are you creating a child this way? Why don't you just adopt? And those just adopt terminology, I was like, that we can't do that, and so with the group I moderate as well, it's not kind to anybody to be like, just adopt, where you're not exploring all of these communities and the impact of what we say what impact that has on adoptees, and the impact of what adoptees say what does that have on us, and how we can all just like bolster each other so that it's understood that these things matter, and we can all understand why it matters to us, and we can work with parents, and we can work with first parents, and we can work with gamete providers to make sure everybody is heard.
And I think it's important because there are people I've spoken to in other organizations that have conferences that are adoptive parents, and they genuinely want to learn. And a lot of them are genuinely, if not surprised, certainly curious, and then kind of go, oh, it makes sense that donor conceived people have some of the same wants, the same questions, the same challenges that adoptees do, especially closed record adoptees. After all the progress some of these adoptive parents have seen, to then see a generation of DCPs facing the issue that adoptees faced in earlier generations, I think they're motivated to want to learn from us. That's certainly the impression I've gotten speaking to some adoptive parent leaders. And what they've said is prospective parents need to hear this. And it's very deliberate to say not prospective intentional parents or prospective receiver parents, receptive parents from the DCP world, and you can probably say better than I can, or prospective adoptive parents, because in this day and age, prospective parents, depending on the details of their, personality and medical history, could be looking at everything. And so it's important for them to understand that we share a lot of the same issues. And you don't do what my husband called the Korea-China thing, where you decide, okay, where can we not have to deal with our processing infertility, and where can we best get away with lying? Let's see, is it DCP or is it closed adoption? And it's better to say your families will survive. My dad survived meeting my birth mother, and the better foundation, as in corporate IT, see, my only years in corporate IT come to play here, is that it's not if, but when you will be hacked. The walls of secrecy you build will be hacked if you're a corporation, if you're a family, and you plan for that. My dad did meet my birth mother. My birth mother did find me. I did find my birth father, and we're all still standing. And I think they need to know that can be, and it doesn't have to be terrible. It can actually be a really good chance to keep growing, throughout life.
We always
Throughout
tell
family,
people like love isn't pie, there's enough love, and you have a different, what I tell people, I have a different relationship with my siblings than I do with my best friend from college, than I do with my best friend from elementary school, than I do with my husband or my daughter or my mother or my grandma. These are all different relationships in our life than I do with coworkers, and I could say, honestly, I love all those people. I love them deeply. It's all a different kind of love. Well, guess what? I can love my biological father and my biological mother and my father who raised me, and I can love them all in different ways. And your child will be able to love these different people in different ways. And it's the goal is to enrich the families and make sure that nothing's being kept from people that can harm them. It's the lack of knowledge that can do the real harm. And the openness and the willingness to let your child explore their feelings about this is what's really progressive. What's really progressive is not just telling early and telling often. That's important. That's the bare minimum at this point. The most progressive thing is fostering their interest, fostering their emotional landscape, fostering the whole landscape about how they feel about this, because then they'll feel safer to discuss it. They'll feel safer to come to you and talk about
Oh,
it.
thank you so much for that. A social worker who was an adoptee, after I gave a talk, said, well, I had a happy adoptive family, so I didn't look. And it was like, no. I said I had a happy adoptive family, so I felt safe looking for my birth father. And it is part of feeling safe, is to be able to have parents do their work so the kids can do their work too. And
I hate to interrupt you, but our call is going to get shut off, and that would be terrible.
Okay.
I'm gonna
Did we get everyone's question?